This is Career Coaching X's and O's, and I'm your host, Mark Anthony Peterson, the founder and thought leader at CRO Consulting, a small business strategy and technology consulting firm. A small part of our practice is executive coaching, but instead of me sharing some of those summations, today we're going to interview Don Jones, author of Be the Master. Don Jones is a lecturer, a coach, and an author, and he's also the vice president for a major technology skills management firm. Don Jones was told he'd never have a job like that he'd never be capable of working in the technology field. He was told that as a high school student. He left high school and became an aircraft mechanic apprentice, but never gave up his passion for technology. Over the years, he taught himself to code, learned the languages, and eventually became the author of several technical books that sold thousands of copies. Mr. Jones wrote Be the Master for all of you who've been told you can't achieve your dream. But he has a special twist to the book. You have to be the master, and you have to give back by teaching others. You're going to enjoy this interview. You're going to want to share this interview with any of your friends who are struggling with their career. I've listened to the interview a half a dozen times, and each time I get a nugget out that helps me unravel another piece of my own personal journey. I know you're going to enjoy it. Here's my interview with Don Jones, author of Be the Master. Welcome to the podcast. This is Career Coaching X's and O's, and we have an extremely exciting show for you today. We're interviewing Mr. Don Jones, the author of Be the Master. Mr. Jones' formal education ended with his 4-year aircraft mechanic apprenticeship. For everything else, he relied on experience, self-learning, and a massive amount of support from past and current bosses, leaders, and mentors. Mr. Jones is a self-taught technology professional, starting as a night shift AES 400 operator and grew into a tech leader, and for over a decade was a freelance writer, speaker, and classroom teacher. Today, he's the vice president for a major technology skills management firm. And we're going to be discussing his book, Be the Master. And in that, we're going to cover some really interesting topics: the steps to mastery, the grind, being a master, and the rules for life. But before we get into those categories and all of the great messages that are in his book, I'd like for Mr. Jones to tell us who he is and what inspires him to do the things that he's done. Mr. Jones, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks very much. Appreciate it. Yeah, so, I guess I'm just kind of a normal blue-collar tech person at heart. And I decided at one point in my career that I wanted to be a teacher, so I got into technology training. And that kind of led to me getting my first gig speaking at a couple of conferences, which I really enjoyed. And that kind of led to my first technology book that a publisher worked with me to produce. And, kind of those things snowball. You just really just kind of look at the opportunities that come to you. And I took a point and I looked back and I realized that there's a lot of people in the industry who will show up on things like Q&A forums. They'll ask questions of folks online, which is fantastic. I think it's wonderful that the internet has allowed us to be able to connect with people all over the world and share. But I noticed that a lot of people would come in and ask questions and then never show up again. I'm like, well, why don't you stick around and, see what other questions you might be able to answer. And you'll hear things like, oh, I don't know enough. I'm not good enough yet. I'm really just a beginner. I'm just getting started. And it struck me that, if you're an apprentice, that's fantastic. Like apprentices don't know everything. And I certainly didn't when I was an aircraft mechanic apprentice, but I was expected to become a master mechanic at some point in my career. And it occurred to me that all of us really are kind of in that apprenticeship situation at some point in our lives and in some topic. But we're expected to become the master. Like you don't just go around asking questions your whole life. At some point, you're expected to start answering questions for other people who are now coming up behind you. And that kind of kicked off a blog post, which got a lot of really good feedback. And that kind of kicked off the first edition of the book. And the book's now in its fourth edition. So it's definitely gone around the block a few times.
I am still struck by the fact that you are a self-taught technologist. For a lot of people, just that word alone is intimidating.
Yeah.
How did you inspire yourself to tackle what many people consider a foreign language?
Yeah, and it's not even that. As when I was in high school, I was actually told I would not be able to make it in technology because I wasn't planning to go to college. And so that's why I became an aircraft mechanic, because I kind of went my whole life. I was the kid in the library in sixth grade playing with the only computer that the school owned because they just fascinated me. And to be told, in 10th grade or something like that, well, you're probably not going to be able to do that as a career, just killed me. It really blew my mind to be that young and be told something like that. And so I went off and did aircraft mechanics, but I never lost that love for just playing with the computers. And I started to realize that, and this is actually a really good example of how people help you out. One of the things we did at our facility was a cultural diversity week. And so everybody could take an hour a day and go attend something, to learn a little bit more about different cultures of people who worked at the facility. And I asked if I could do a little class on how to upgrade your computer. Because computers back then were these huge boxes. You unscrewed the lid and took them off. And I'd been playing with mine forever. And so I did this class, and a bunch of the people who worked in my shop came along, and they watched and wanted to be supportive. I had a really good time. And I was only like 20, 21 back then. And after it was over with, I'm packing my computer back up. One of the guys came over and he says, "What the heck are you doing working on airplanes? This is what you should be doing." And it really I must have just been in the right place because it really struck me. And I think the thing is that we tend to, and it's something I talk about in the book, we tend to create this like toxic relationship around education, where learning is something that happens in a classroom and it's given to you by a teacher. And we go through that all through high school. Most of us go on to get that same attitude through college. And no one ever stops and says, "Hey, you passed the line. You're good enough now. You can start teaching." But the reality is so many different trades and careers and everything else, what we really learn of value comes to us on the job. Most people who are doing almost any type of job, except maybe medicine or law or something really serious like that, but a lot of us are just learning what we're learning on the job, and we're learning it from our colleagues, maybe our bosses. Well, those are our masters, and we're their apprentice at that time. And I think if you really look at the knowledge that you use in your day-to-day job, almost no matter what your job is, you learned most of that on the job. Maybe you had some schooling that gave you some background, and that's wonderful. But a lot of what you're actually using day-to-day, you did self-learn. You learned on your own and by interacting with different people who were serving as a master to you. And I think one of the messages in the book that's really important is that at some point you have to stop yourself and stop looking ahead of your career at what's next and turn around and look behind you at who's back there, because you probably have some folks behind you that you could start helping almost no matter where you are in your career. And then you're just paying it back, basically. That debt that you incurred by learning from someone else, you pay back by teaching someone else.
That's a powerful message, a powerful, powerful message. And I certainly agree with you that the best things that we can get when it comes to learning are when we dive in and learn from that experience. I was struck by the fact that people like Abraham Lincoln, who ultimately went on to become a lawyer, was an apprentice to another lawyer. And during that time period, doctors were the same sort of, apprentice-master type relationship, and they worked under someone who, like you said, turned and found someone who showed a passion for the profession and brought them under their wing and helped them establish a set of skills that they then could go and put their shingle out in another town.
Well, you know what's funny is those trades still do that. We just don't call it apprentices anymore. Like you go to 3 years of law school, you get out, you still have to be an intern for a long time. You go to 6 years of medical school, you come out, you still have to be a resident. We don't call them apprentices, but those trades still do that. And I think it's actually a really, really good example of you don't learn everything you need to know in this formal learning experiences. You learn most of what you need to know on the job, working next to someone who's been doing it a long time.
Absolutely. And that's what struck me with the first story in the introduction of the book, Timothy with the Blacksmith, the story of an apprentice coming in and learning from a master. Talk us through that and kind of tell us what that key lesson that Timothy takes out of starting out as an apprentice with a master blacksmith.
I think there's a whole bunch of things from that. That story is really meant to be the anchor that the rest of the book hangs off of. In fact, if you go to beTheMaster.com, there's an audiobook available, and that Timothy the Blacksmith is the sample chapter, so anybody can listen to that. And there's a lot to it. It starts with you really do learn the important things from the people who already know those. You learn them working on the job. And there's another lesson in there because halfway through Timothy's time at the blacksmith, the master blacksmith hires another apprentice. And so now Timothy is a journeyman. He's kind of in between, and he's expected to also help teach this new apprentice. Which kind of emphasizes the fact that you don't have to be an expert in everything to be a master. Masters are people who teach, and so anyone who's teaching is fulfilling that role, even though they're not an expert. In fact, at the very end of the story, Timothy's own master moves on to retirement, and Timothy says, well, I'm not ready yet. There's so much I don't know, and his master says, well, I could never make a proper shield. And he leaves because he wasn't an expert either. His role was master, which simply means he was there to bring along an apprentice and a journeyman. And the story encapsulates the idea that it's okay for us to fail. It's fantastic when we can set up safe failures so that the people we're teaching can kind of experience failure and learn from it in a safe way. And the idea of figuring out what your own success is supposed to be comes into that story. Like you get to decide what success means, which is something that our culture doesn't really do a good job of reminding us. And that's where the rat race comes from. And so there's a whole bunch in that story. And the rest of the book really does refer back to it. It brings additional bits of the story in as it goes, but there's a lot of referring back to that because it really is a common story that a lot of people can relate to in a lot of ways. And it really does kind of teach you that you can be the owner in your own career situation. And there's a lot more to it than just your success.
I was really taken by the story, and it spoke to me as a manager in saying, here is a framework of how to create opportunities for safe failures. And there's a lesson in it for every person who manages a group when you look at how the expert blacksmith brought along the two apprentices and then ultimately the journeyman and the apprentice. And it was just inspiring to me to say that this is how each manager should be thinking about the people that look to them for leadership, that you have to create the culture where they can strive for excellence and strive to build a skill without the fear of failure.
Yep. Yeah, that's exactly it.
So after the story of Timothy and the blacksmith, you move into describing the steps to mastery, and you emphasize success as being a critical part of becoming a master. Let's unpack that a little bit, because that kind of caught me off guard when I read that part of the book.
Yeah, and I think it's because a lot of us, if you really talk to people and say, why don't you go hold a little neighborhood class on such and such a topic that you're good at, maybe have a cooking class or something like that. One of the first things you get is that imposter syndrome of I'm not good enough. That's real common. And so there is a whole section on the book that talks about becoming worthy. And you already are worthy. You just have to realize it. But the next thing that happens is people say, I don't have the time. Right? Time is a finite resource. We're all only given so much of it, and we have to decide how we're going to use it. We spend, roughly a third of our lives at work, a third asleep, hopefully, and then a third in whatever we choose to do with it. And success then is an integral part, not so much of being a master, but of creating the time and the space to do so. Like if you're still working 14 hours a day, you're not going to have time to help other people. And so you do have to achieve your success. You have to get to the point where your career is supporting the type of life you want to have so that you can create the time to include helping other people in that. And I think that's the really, really important thing is it's not just achieve success. It's achieve your success because your success is just a means to an end. And that end is whoever you have decided you want to be when you grow up, whenever that happens. So you really have to do some time thinking about who am I? What's important to me? What's important to my family? How much money is it going to take, because that's the world we live in, to support that type of lifestyle? Do I want to be someone who takes my family traveling internationally? Am I somebody who just wants to live in a very modest home in a small town? Who are we together? And then what success is it going to take to get us there? Because once you focus on just the right amount of success for you, you'll find that you don't have to try as hard as you might have thought. I've had people who've read the book and they've come to me and they said, you know what? That changed so much of my perspective. I just took a new job. I took a promotion. I got more money and a better title, and I was very unhappy. And when I went through this process and I really thought about defining myself, who I am, and I looked at what career would it take to support that, I realized that my previous job was my success. I had already made it. I just couldn't tell because I had never really set the finish line for myself. I'd already passed the finish line. He said, well, fortunately, I realized this before they backfilled my old job. And so I declined my promotion. I took my old job. I'm not working as many hours now. I'm really good at my job. I understand it. It works for me. I am now living the life that I wanted to live, and I've got the time and the space to teach other people. And for him, what he wanted to do, he has 2 daughters, and this is a wonderful story. He says, my wife, car broke down, got a flat tire, and she was out by herself. And she had a cell phone, and she was able to get someone to come help her out. But she was really, really scared the whole time. And you can understand how scary that would be, especially if it's at night, bad weather. He said, we decided that we never wanted our daughters to be that afraid. And so we taught our daughters how to change the tire. And we made fun of it, really good time. He said, and then I realized that there's lots of sons and daughters who might be scared. So he got with some other parents, and they went to the PTA of their school. All the parents drove their cars down, and they had a giant tire changing day one Saturday in the school parking lot, and they just taught all the kids to be a little more self-sufficient. He said, that's what I wanted to do. I never realized I have no problem changing the tire, but that's not something everybody's born with. And so now I've taught all these people to do that, and they've developed a curriculum, and the school is going to be adopting that curriculum. And the story goes on, but it's once you really start focusing on that, what do I need? What is my success? And once I know what that is, I can start aiming just for that. I don't have to be in this rat race of wanting more and more and more and more. And that, not wanting the more and more, is what frees up the time and the space for you to help other people.
That word, my goal and my success, resonated with me on so many levels. So many people get caught in a vision of success that's not their own. And it's only when they reconcile with themselves of what they're truly passionate about can they set a more realistic goal that's in alignment with their own personal capabilities and desires for life. And when that's determined, as you said, capacity certainly opens up for them to become a master. And I talk extensively with small business owners and startups about creating that executive capacity, the ability to say, what is it we want? What's most important? What differentiates our company? And what is most important to the growth of the company on that 2x2 axis. And everything in that upper right-hand box, that's what you do. Everything else, figure out how to get rid of it. Because you need that capacity to have time to give back to others, to pay attention to those things that are most important. So that resonated with me. And it also spoke to the point of having the ability to clearly define your goal. And do you recommend that people seek out mentors to help them through this process? Because that's a tough thing for people to give up the rat race and then define a more realistic goal for themselves.
Yeah, so I actually do the occasional workshop, both online and in person, and we spend most of our time on that. Define your success and define yourself are the two most important bits, and we do spend a ton of time on that. And it's not only a mentor or someone who can maybe just be there for you to bounce ideas off of, it's the other stakeholders in their life. It's your spouse, it's your kids, if they're old enough to have this kind of conversation. It's even thinking about your dog. Like if you've decided you want to be a jet set international traveler, but you also love to have dogs around you, that's going to kind of be awkward. Like those dogs become stakeholders in your life too, and you're gone all the time now. So it's really just figuring that out. I think once people start thinking, and this is super morbid, but it's how I kind of recommend you do it in the book, because I think people can relate to it. You basically write your own obituary. Like you write it in that past tense. Joe was a loving father who was always there for his kids' soccer games. Mary was a world traveler. She was a citizen of the world, and she enjoyed nothing more than exploring new cultures. Like you write in that tense. So by the time you get to the end of your life, if you've been doing it right, all those things are true. And that meant you lived the life that you wanted to lead. Now, obviously, you don't want to wait till you're dead to get there. You want to get there way in advance so that you can enjoy a long time of all those things. But by writing it that way, I find it puts people in the right context and the right way of thinking, because these aren't goals that you're just going to achieve and then move on to the next thing. This is the finish line. Like if you achieve this, if this is how you are living, then you are happy. This is the way you want to live all the time. And it might change. Someone who's young who writes something like that might fall in love, decide to have a family, and they're going to rewrite what they see themselves as. And that's fantastic. You should always do that, right? The world isn't a static place. But by having that there, and I actually recommend that it get written down in a workbook, not typed into a computer, because writing is a much more connected experience. It forms stronger synaptic networks in our minds. It creates something that's more powerful for us and more impactful. By writing that down, you can always go back to it and say, you know what decisions am I going to make today that are going to help me get or stay there? That is the thing that is important to me. It's tough to stick with this type of thing because it's so easy to just let the world kind of come at you and you just deal with whatever's coming at you. And I talk about how discipline is really nothing more than remembering why you started a thing in the first place. Sticking with something is really just a matter of remembering why you started. And by having that self-definition written down, anytime you're feeling kind of weak, like, oh, man, I'm just not into it this week, you can go back to that and you can look at it and go, you know what, this is what I'm in it for. This is what I care about. Yeah, okay, I'm going to get back on the horse.
Where do most people stall in the steps to becoming a master?
The ongoing execution. So there's a workbook that kind of goes with the book, and you can download a PDF and print it yourself. It's called The Grind, and it's called that because that's kind of what it is. It's a grindstone. Like if you know what your self is, you know what life you want to lead, and you've figured out the level of success that's going to support that, like where you need to get to. The rest of it is all just moving in that direction every single day. And if you're kind of already lined up, like if it turns out that your life and your success are already well connected, it can be pretty easy to stick with that. But if you write those things down and you realize, you know what, my career's kind of pointing in the wrong direction now, I might be looking at a new job. I might be looking at moving somewhere else where I can get that job. You run into some things that are hard, and they're hard to stick with. Just getting a new job, you know how horrible of an experience the whole interview cycle is, and filling out resumes and everything else. I think it's that day-to-day execution where folks are willing to get out of the driver's seat and slide back into the passenger seat of their life and just let life happen to them instead of making decisions about it. And that's one of the reasons that I have used a version of the Grind workbook since the early 2000s, because I realized I was just letting myself and my career drift and go in whatever direction the current was flowing. And I wasn't being an active participant. I wasn't driving anything. And by writing it down, by having a plan, okay, this month, this is my plan. My plan might change from month to month. I'm going to react to what happens on the ground. I'm going to modify my plan as it makes sense. And then on a weekly basis, this week, here's the 2 things I'm going to work on. It's only a week. I'm not going to unpack the entire world in a week. I'm only going to get so much done. I realize that. And these are the 2 I'm going to focus on, so that every day as I sit down, I can make a decision. Hey, am I going to burn 20 minutes on Facebook? Yeah, you know what? Right now I am. My brain is exhausted. That is the decision I'm going to make. Am I going to play video game for 4 hours tonight? Or am I going to sit down and watch that training video on leadership skills that I know I need to watch because that's a direction I want to go? Well, I've written it down, and so I can make a decision about what I'm going to do. By writing it down and really having it in front of you, I think it helps overcome procrastination. It helps kind of overcome that built-in laziness that we all have. It's not a bad thing. It's just part of human nature. I think it helps provide us with some discipline so that we remember why we started the thing in the first place. I think where people really drop it is when they don't do that. I think people sometimes, they'll read the book, they'll be like, okay, this is just like the Franklin Covey 7 Habits thing, and I'll go get my day runner and I'll write the things down. But this is much, much simpler, and it's really just you writing down what's important to you and you making decisions about what you're going to do. And if you do it, like if you can put enough faith in the system to just do the workbook for 6 months, you'll realize that it's really pointing you. It's really doing what it says it does. And once people get past that 6-month mark, if you can stick with it that long, it works. It's like going to the gym, right? You have to go to the gym for several weeks before you're going to get results. If you drop your gym membership in the 2nd week of the year, you're never going to get that New Year's resolution out of the way. But if you can stick with it and you'll start seeing results, it's a lot easier to stick with it after that because you know it's working.
You mentioned life rules as part of the grind plan, and I want to make sure that I'm absolutely clear. Are the life rules kind of the guardrails for how you plan to manage your success as part of the grind plan? And then, as you said, you come back and revise kind of your interim goals within the context of those life rules. Did I read that right?
That's more or less it. I think the 9 life rules for me are fundamental, very, very simple behaviors that lead to successful outcomes, whether it's in your personal life, your professional life, or whatever else. I think when we're not mindful about those simple, basic behaviors, it's easy for us to not do them, and that creates negative outcomes. So one of the life rules, for example, is be your word. That's a very simple thing. I think most people would say, yeah, I'm a person of my word. If I say I'm going to do something, I do it. But most of us really aren't all the time. Like we let little stuff go, or we'll tell someone, yeah, I'll have that to you on Friday, but they don't actually get it till Tuesday. And that creates a kind of creep. Like it's a loss of your own self-discipline. It means maybe you're not good at managing time, and that's something you need to focus on learning, or whatever it means. But all those rules are the things that lead to positive outcomes. Like every single person that I've looked at who has achieved their success, you can see all of those behaviors in them. So for me, it's a checklist every month. And I go through the checklist and I reflect on the prior month. I say, you know what? Did I really live these things? Did I really show up every day and live these? And I'll go through periods where it's, yeah, you know what? I didn't. I kind of lost my positive attitude several times this past month. I am going to make as part of my plan this month to focus on that. Because if you don't focus on it, you can't fix it. But I've admitted to myself that this is not an area I'm proud of. I really don't feel I'm living the rule. And that allows me to focus on changing it, which inevitably creates more positive outcomes.
It seems that the life rules would be different for each person, as those life rules are ultimately linked to your personal goals and your personal success. How does one go about doing a gap analysis on themselves to determine which life rules they should put in their grind plan?
So all the life rules are pretty universal, actually. They're not a plan. The life rules aren't get a better job. The life rules are nothing about get a better salary, move to a better town. It's none of that. Those are aspects of everyone's plan, and everyone's plan is going to be different. Like what you need to get to your success is going to depend on what that is, where you are right now, what compromises you're willing to make. Those are all part of your plan. The life rules are they're almost basic human behaviors. You know, it's like when you go to work, remember why you're at work. Work isn't the same as home. Like you got to go on with your game face, and you've got to be a professional when you're at work. I think some of that stuff got baked into our culture a long time ago. You know, when you worked for a large corporation or a large bank or something like that, you put on special work clothes. You had a tie, you had a jacket, a nice shirt. You didn't wear that type of stuff when you were at home. So we had a costume change, and that costume change reminded us of the rule, and it was kind of baked into the culture. We've stepped away from a lot of that. You know, you have a lot more places where it's casual dress. People are encouraged to maybe bring in some photos or some trinkets from home to put around their desk. And I kind of advocate being careful with that, because when you go to work, you need to have your game face on. And if work looks a lot like home and you dress the same and there's no costume change, it gets really hard to remember, oh yeah, I need to put my game face on today. I had a really bad day last night at home. Things aren't going well. There's a problem with the family, whatever it is. It's hard to remember to leave that behind you and put on the game face. And so the rules are really just core basic behaviors that I think most people look at and go, well, yeah, obviously, except that they're not obvious. And it's really easy to forget to do them if you're not really focusing on them.
That makes sense. That is clarifying. And for each individual, then it's like, yeah, creating the right culture for each circumstance in your life. And that is extremely important.
It is.
These steps lead you to becoming a master, as you lay out in the book. And when you get to the chapter about being a master, you say masters should teach, protect, learn, unite. But then the one that caught me off guard until I thought about Timothy again was you say masters must leave.
Yep.
Walk the audience through why you specify that masters must ultimately leave.
Yeah, I think whenever you set out to teach something to someone, you have to do it with an attitude that you're going to go away afterwards. Like you're going to have a certain amount of time, and then you're not going to be there. And I mean, any parent can relate to this. You know, you get 18, 20 years with your kid, and then technically they're the ones leaving, but you're stepping back from their lives, and they're going to have to go out on their own. And so you have to think of all the things that they're going to need to operate with when they get out there. So you want to make sure they get through the failures that you know they're going to hit, and you can set them up so they can do that in a safe way and learn from it and make it a positive experience and not a crash. So yeah, masters have to be able to step away. If you're teaching something to someone and you can't step away, then either you're not done or you didn't do it right. And I think if you engage in the activity of teaching with that in mind, it shapes how you do it. If you look at Timothy's story, for example, his master did leave at the end of the story. He retired. But all throughout, he was obviously teaching Timothy how to make horseshoes and nails and this other stuff. But he was also teaching Timothy how to teach the next apprentice. Because he was thinking to himself, you know what, I'm not going to be here forever. There needs to be more apprentices in the future. I need to make sure that this kid becomes a true master and is able to teach the next generation, because I'm not going to be here to do it. I think once you kind of take that attitude of I won't be here, it changes it. I know I've had in work, I've had a number of companies I've worked for where my manager very much had that attitude. One of my first jobs, since I think I was still in high school, I worked for a small retailer. It was electronics boutique. They became EB Games. I think they're GameStop now. And in a lot of retail settings like that, two types of employees. You have what they call key holders, and those are the ones who literally have the keys to unlock the store and lock it up. And they usually have to count down the cash and do all the paperwork and all that. And then you have people who are not key holders. And they might be responsible for cleaning and putting stuff on the shelves and helping customers, but they're not quite at the level of trust where they get to handle the money and the paperwork. Well, my manager's attitude was every single person in the store knows how to do every single job in the store, all of it. Everyone's a key holder. Because she had that attitude of, I'm not going to be here and I want them to be self-sufficient. And I carried that attitude through my entire career. Even today, I have people who report to me. When we set up a new project or something like that, I want them to know how to do the entire thing without me, because that's how their career is going to advance. They need to not have to depend on me at all. I need to be able to leave, to step away completely so that they can be successful on their own.
I tell entrepreneurs all the time that if you can't step away from your business for a month and come back and that business is still functioning at the level it was or better, then you haven't created a business, you've just created a job. And
that's exactly true.
That's why I went back and reread that so many times in your book, and thought about the story with Timothy and the blacksmith. And it is something I suggest every manager take the time and read and focus in on everything you have in the book. But certainly that leave part made me want to recommend to every manager that if that's not part of your management framework, you're missing an opportunity for your own career advancement. Because if you can't have a department of self-sufficient employees, you never have the opportunity to look over the mountain at the next and greatest thing that your group could tackle. You're always heads down and missing opportunities that go right by you. So this was a moment that made me smile personally as a manager.
Yeah, I think that's something that a lot of people miss is some folks they don't think about it. And if you don't think about it, then it just happens, right? You're not making a decision. I think other people worry about job security. If nobody needs me, then I'm a little worried about my job. And I have found nearly all the time that if you can make yourself easy to move because your replacements are all lined right up behind you, then that move tends to happen. And if that's in your plan for your career, then that's often the best way to make it happen, is to create so much force behind you that they almost push you up the ladder into your next opportunity, because they're so eager and ready and capable of filling in once you've moved on. Absolutely.
Now, towards the end of the book, you stress rules for life, and there are many terrific rules for life. But one that I wanted to highlight here in the interview, let blue sky mode happen, is the name of the rule for life. And I really wanted to have you spend a few moments talking to the audience about the blue sky mode.
Yeah, so that's a Disney-ism for me, and Disney has a lot of strong things they do for management, and that's one of them. So Disney has a division called Walt Disney Imagineering, and the Imagineers are the ones who create their theme park experiences. They create every new restaurant and shop and ride and everything else. And one of their rules is when they start their initial discussions about a new attraction or a new land or a new theme park, is they have what they call blue sky conversations. And that means going into a room and never saying no. It means just thinking about what could be. What if we did this? Oh, what if we did this? And everyone just kind of riffs on each other. and they come up with ever more detailed and ever more ambitious and aspirational ideas for what they might do. And no one says, well, we can't do that because of gravity, or we can't do that because it would cost too much. You're not allowed to say that in blue sky mode, because the blue sky is the limit. The limit goes on forever. There's no ceiling on this thing. Let's just keep riffing and come up with the most amazing thing ever, and let's assume we can do it, and we can afford it, and it is possible. And then when you start to lock something in, what you find is when you take that attitude, instead of limiting yourself to what is known and what is capable and what's possible now, you start thinking, okay, sure, this is a wonderful vision we've come up with, but it is going to be expensive. How do we address that? How could we still do this and overcome that hurdle? What would it take? And you start inventing new things that way. You create new processes, new ideas, new presentations, and that's how they move the bar forward. And I think everybody has probably been in the conference room with someone who was the no person, where it's, what if our company did this? No, we can't do that because that poor little idea never got off the ground. It never got a chance to even take a breath. And when you kill ideas like that, people stop having ideas. Like if every new little idea you put out on the table just gets its neck cut right away, you're going to stop putting your precious little ideas out on the table. You don't want to do that. You don't want to see that. And I think it's important as just a general behavior to let blue sky mode happen. And it can be as simple as figuring out the next vacation for you and your family. Oh, what if we went to Hawaii? Well, we never could because of this and this. Well, wait. What if we could? What would it look like? Where would we stay? What sort of things would we do? And if you start thinking about that, and then it's, okay, what would it actually take? Well, it's a very expensive flight, but I've been flying a lot for work and I've got a ton of miles saved up. Let's look at that. And maybe if we got one of these credit cards that gives you miles, we could do this and save up that over a couple of years. And you start, once you have a clear vision of what it could look like that's unencumbered by physics and reality, then you can start creating a path to that vision. It's really not any different from how a great entrepreneur runs a company. What if we just had people use their own cars to pick people up and drive them all over town? Oh, that's stupid. You can't do that because there's the laws and there's the... what if we could? What if that's the vision? And now how do we create a path to that vision? How do we get there? And that's how those things happen, is just by letting blue sky mode happen.
I love that. I absolutely love that. It is the great way to, and I think, wrap this interview up is to inspire people with that definition of blue sky mode, how you can apply it in business and in your personal life, and that it comes with a plan, but it also comes with the requirement to get rid of the word no and allow yourself to dream about the possibilities and then build the infrastructure underneath it to get there. I absolutely love that as a message that everyone should tape to their refrigerator. Let blue sky mode happen, and then remind themselves of that every day. Mr. Jones, this has been a terrific interview. I have enjoyed every moment of it, and I would love it if you would tell the audience how they can buy Be the Master, and maybe even spend a couple of minutes telling them about all the other great books that you've written. As a self-taught technologist, you've written a lot of books on how to do the things you did to become a technologist. So please tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so be-the-master.com will take you straight to a page with links for getting the book in paperback or ebook or the audiobooks or whatever else. There's even some recordings from workshops I've done. So if you want to kind of do a self-paced little workshop that way. And then if you go to my website, donjones.com, there's a books page, and that kind of lists out all the books I've done. There's probably 50 or 60 technology books stretching back to 2001. The old ones are no good anymore, but there's some newer ones. These days I'm writing a lot more about business and leadership. And so you'll find books like that. There's one called Let's Talk Business, which is kind of a primer on the world of business for someone who works in a business but hasn't really been exposed to things like business finance and leadership and all that. And I'm also writing fiction now, science fiction and fantasy. And so you'll find all those at donjones.com.
Wow. And I know that there are going to be people in the audience who are going to want to contact you about those workshops and about your speaking engagements. How can they follow you and contact you?
So you can find me on Twitter at ConcentratedDon. And you can also contact me directly through the website. If you go to donjones.com, one of the pages is called HMU for Hit Me Up. And you can drop a note there, and I try to get back to people within a couple of business days.
Excellent. Mr. Jones, this has been absolutely wonderful. We appreciate you coming on Career Coaching X's and O's. I know I've been motivated. I've learned a lot, and the audience is going to get a tremendous amount out of this episode.
Awesome. Thanks so much for having me. It was wonderful speaking with you.
I want to thank Mr. Don Jones again for coming on the podcast. We're going to put everywhere you can find Be the Master in the show notes to make it easy for you to get your copy. I know you're going to share this episode, like this episode, and even subscribe to the podcast. All of those things help us bring more episodes to you. So thank you for doing that. Tell us the issues you're struggling with in your career, and we will research them, and we might even do a podcast episode about it. If you need more support in your career, please find us on the web at ceyero.com, CEYERO.com, and let us help you develop a plan for your career. Follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook at Ceyero Consulting. This has been Career Coaching X's and O's, and I'm your host, Mark Anthony Peterson, founder and thought leader at Ceyero Consulting.